So, welcome to episode 22 of the Sensitive Soul Support Podcast. This is Stacy. Jen is not with us today, and I have the privilege of doing another guest speaker interview with David Delisle, who lives in Canada. And I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. David and I met when he joined the Empath Training Lab last year. He was the only male to join us in our group of maybe 14 people. So welcome, David. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hi, Stacy. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to have this conversation and get into some pretty fun stuff and as well give that male perspective. So this will be fun.
So one of the things I said to you before we went on is that I really think most of our audience is going to really want to hear this episode because it's only been the female perspective so far. So you are our very first wonderfully empathic and sensitive male that we're having on the show. And I'm just super excited to understand more from you. I know a little bit about your experience from the few conversations that we've had, but I want to hear more about what it's been like for you and all of it, like the struggles, the challenges, but also the really unique, hopefully joys of being a male empath. So I know there's a lot we can cover in this hour. So I already told David he's coming back. So you're all going to want to hear from him again. So we might not get to everything today, but maybe you can just start us at the beginning and tell us a little bit what it was like for you as a child, being an empath, being that deeply reflective, deep listener, deep feeling kind of a person in the world that, I always say was not made really for people like us. And then how things went for you through those childhood and teenage years. And then we'll talk about how far you've come.
I'll start by saying, some of why I'm so excited about talking about this is because I think everything's balanced. So if you think of your group and how many empaths you talk to and how it's female dominated, I don't think that's true. Balance would make sense that there'd be just as many male empaths as female, just as many male highly sensitives as female. So I think that is balance. So what we're seeing isn't nature so much as nurture, where we really are doing a disservice to our young boys so that they can't grow up as empaths or have that shut out.
Just letting that land. And I agree with you. It's I look at my group on Facebook, Sensitive Soul Sisterhood. Look at that. Look what I did there. But there are a few men in the group that I don't think mind that the group is called Sisterhood. And it's this assumption that most empaths are female, and it's complete bullshit. Like you said, there's plenty of men and boys in the world who share these traits that we have. But there's so many cultural and societal norms that get in the way of those boys, those teens, those men really getting in touch with that side of them, and it's not even just a side, it's a full blown, you're wired differently and your brain's actually different in some ways. So tell us about what it was like for you when you were younger, being a sensitive boy. What was your family like? What was school like for you? What were your friends like for you? Could you be yourself? Could you be sensitive as a kid?
And no, not even remotely. So that's why it was interesting. Even in your group, I found a lot of the emphasis was on shielding and blocking and being overwhelmed. Whereas for me, my work has been to break down those shields and let it in, because all those walls went up at such an early age because they had to. So as a young boy, if you're sitting on a playground and, something strikes you, or you're feeling those heavy emotions. So when you're being scolded, or you're seeing someone else getting scolded, or there's anger, or there's just those emotions are overwhelming for a young child. And so you'll cry, or you'll just feel that overwhelm, like that emotional flow through you. But if you're this young boy sitting on the sidelines crying, I mean, that's an easy target for teasing and being made fun of, and
Mm,
bullied. So that's not something we allow our young boys to be. I mean, those boys are going to be destroyed very quickly if they maintain that and keep letting all that in. So you start blocking it down and putting up shields and not feeling and not reading other people,
mm,
and you just don't have that confidence, and you don't know why. You just think everyone feels this, but you're the
mm.
one crying, so you're the one who's gotten, you're just not tough enough.
Yeah.
And why is it overwhelming you when it's, nothing's actually really happening? Like, it's all that energy and those feelings, and so no one
Mm.
sees what's happening, and you're just overwhelmed. So
Wow.
that's where I think a lot of our boys, like, as men, I think definitely we have fewer male empaths than women, for sure. And when I was talking about that balance, I think our young boys, it's probably 50-50. And then we just learn to block all those feelings if we are feeling them.
Yeah, so interesting. I so appreciate you sharing that. For you, it was like blocking, just it was blocking. And by the way, that group you were talking about, so David was talking about my Empath Training Lab, which was a program I ran last year, which has been, by the way, updated and it has evolved. Whereas on my journey, it was something that I really needed mastery over, was that protection piece and how to ground and how to stay in my own energy. And the more that I've been working on healing my trauma and rewiring my nervous system, the less I am finding I have to do that blocking, and I'm able to like flex in and flex out of situations more seamlessly. But you were saying like having to block as a child, like having that overwhelming feeling and knowing that you couldn't share those feelings because they were so unacceptable by the kids. There would be, like you said, teasing and being made fun of and being bullied, or the girls looking at you a certain way or the boys looking at you a certain way. And like, do you remember having a lot of experiences like that? And like, like, as you look back on it, when do you feel like that time came where you were just like, okay, I'm going to stop feeling like I have to block it all now? Like, when did that happen for you? Because that makes my heart like so sad to think about you as this sensitive, beautiful young boy who like had that pivotal moment where it was just like, okay, it's just safer to check out. I'm not going to feel anymore. Like, that's crazy that you remembered like that being your experience, just like turning it off. When did
Yeah,
that
like
happen?
it probably evolved over those elementary years. So,
Mm,
grade 1 through 7, like that whole period where that wall will get stronger and stronger and stronger. Because when you do feel that overwhelm, like especially as a young boy, like if you're gonna be overwhelmed or break down, or you're still and you can't react, or especially tears,
mm,
those, and we don't like that. Like, if we see like a young boy, grade 7, crying in front of the class, like, it's men, women, adults, teachers, like, we're going to be like, what's with this, sappy, weak boy? Like, he's just so delicate, like, we've got to toughen him up. Like, that's
mm,
what you're going to see, not that they're pulling in all those emotions. So, when things happen, those emotions are heavy, and they are overwhelming. So it's not that you're a weak kid, it's they're heavy.
yeah,
And so you just would start stealing yourself more and more, so you don't have those feelings, because those feelings are going to make you cry or freeze or embarrass yourself.
yeah,
And so it wasn't like a sudden
mm,
moment, but definitely it built up and built up.
yeah,
And I mean, probably through childhood, the last time I probably cried, or definitely cried, like publicly or privately, was probably around like grade 7 or something like that.
mm,
Because you learn to block that. And I think that's the thing, is we see there is that big gender difference, and how we treat it and how we view it. And the problem is, at that age, it is a weakness, and um, it is not what we want to see in our young men, because at that age, you don't have the confidence or the self, like, you don't know yourself well enough to own
mhm,
it. So like now, like, and we see it even in men. Like if you see a man crying and just beside themselves and just, they just, women and men will recoil from that. But if you see that same man crying, but they know who they are, they're not, they're letting it come. They're not trying to force it out. They're not
Yeah.
overwhelmed. They're owning it. They're vulnerable. Like I'm here and you can see these tears, but I'm still a confident, strong, know who I am man. That's the trick. And that's what makes it so difficult, because without that confidence and knowing, it's just, this weak and blubbering and we don't get it. And so it's so hard, because that journey to get to a point where I can own it. Like I can, if I cry in front of a strong, man who's all about strength, I can own it in such a way that I'm not diminished in their eyes. But to be at that point, that like I have to bring my A game. Like that's not something, if I had any insecurities or any
Yeah.
weakness or any doubt in myself, that would be preyed upon.
I'm so fascinated by that. So when did it change for you that you all of a sudden, and how did that change for you? Because this is something that I imagine a lot of our listeners who have highly sensitive partners who are male, or empath partners who are male, but don't know that they are yet. Like, or women out there, or men listening who have sons who they know are highly sensitive. What happened for you that all of a sudden you decided, like, I can do my emotions, but there's got to be this sort of confidence and sense of ownership around them? Like, when did that happen for you, and how did that come about for you? Because that's freaking fascinating. It sounds like something happened, or maybe it was just being around a certain mentor or person or role model where you started to like learn, oh, so like I can feel my feelings, I can be emotional, and as long as I can own it and be strong and confident about it, like I've got myself, like I can show up that way. Like, how did that happen for you?
Yeah, like most of this is more like being on this journey of sort of self-awareness and professional development. So just inquiry. So looking back, I can sort of start making sense of the journey. But at the time, I didn't realize. So even,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even classified myself as an empath till I was probably in your group, a year and a half, 2 years ago. And even then, like I knew it, and I could feel like other people, like it was other people saying to me, like they just assumed I was an empath, and I knew it. And like all the stuff you're saying and picking up, like you're an empath, you should be in this group. I'm like,
What the hell's she
empath? I don't
talking
know.
about?
What are you talking about? Like I didn't, even with all the blocks, stuff was still coming through and I couldn't filter it all out, but I didn't identify that way. So a lot of this is more looking back.
Yeah.
But I do know through like a lot of high school, like finding myself and finding my confidence and learning how to navigate the world, I dropped a lot of those insecurities. And a big one, I mean, probably where a lot of it did shift. Like I mentioned this to you briefly on sort of our call the other day. In grade 7, there was a pretty pivotal point where I didn't realize how pivotal it was till looking back in time. But at that time, I remember, because so thinking too, like when I'm growing up as a childhood, my family, like I grew up in a, very blue collar family, and, a lot of drinking, a lot of bikers, a lot of loud parties. Like I remember like high school trying to tell, like it would be like 3 a.m. and I'm like, guys, I've got a test
Wow.
tomorrow. Like, can we just cool it down? Like this wasn't a quiet, calm household. Like it was noise all the time. Like,
Wow. That's a surprise to me. Like, I can't picture you in that environment. Like, it's so foreign to me. Like David in a house with all that noise and like bikers and like loud music. And like, that's so funny to me. Like, that seems like the opposite environment that
well,
you would have
and that's the
preferred to
thing, and
grow
that's
up
what's so
in.
crazy. So when you talk about these things like the blocking, like it was there, like there was no opportunity, like and to some degree I like that happened, because if it was this very nurturing, quiet, calm environment, I probably wouldn't have learned the other side and how to navigate. I'd still be struggling.
Yeah.
But to give you an
Yes.
idea of like the noise, like, grade 6, I went down to the hardware store and bought my own lock for my own door to lock my door when I wasn't around or when I was
Well,
there. Like there was, there
mm.
would be, there'd be a party, and like my brother had a bunk bed, and someone would be like, he'd wake up and someone would be sleeping in his bed in the morning. Like there was like zero boundaries and just chaos. So,
Mm, mm.
so you have to be, I was forced to learn how to like
Yeah.
navigate that.
Yeah. And you know what? Something you said that's so freaking brilliant is that, and I know Dr. Elaine Aron talks about this in the book, The Highly Sensitive Person, that as we are becoming more and more aware of our sensitivities and really owning them, that it's so important for us, if we're people who live too much in, to come out more. And if we're people who live too much out, to learn how to come in more. So it's like this idea of, whatever you had to like endure growing up as the sensitive person you were, whether it was like you had to fit into whatever mold you did for it to be, a copacetic environment in your home, that those of us who kind of went inward have to practice now how to be resilient and come out. Like we can't avoid every concert that ever is going to be for the rest of our life. We can't just hide and live in a freaking bubble. We have to practice like resilience and tolerance for things that have been so overwhelming for us, and vice versa. If we're people who have had to be out a lot and really extroverted and have never had that time to go in to draw within, we have to learn how to get comfortable doing that too, because as we know, that helps us to reset our nervous system. So that's so amazing that you had that, looking back on it, you could say it was really fucked up. Like I had all this noise and there was no boundaries and like, woe is me, but like you're choosing to see it as a gift because it helped you become more of a resilient person and know how to navigate those situations where you were overwhelmed. So when you got into like 7th grade, like what happened when you were like a young teenager? Did you all of a sudden, was that when like your confidence kind of budded more and more and you like felt like, okay, I can be with the guys and be a little bit more confident in like being emotional? And did you have other guy friends who like understood that and saw you and got you and were kind of like you, or at least accepted you for that? Because I can't imagine the pressure as a non-empath male in that time of life with social issues and peer pressure. And like those early teen years are so tricky socially. Like I can't imagine just being a male, yet an empathic male in that social part of life, that developmental stage. It must have been so hard to like be confident in being emotional.
Yeah. So I'll get to sort of what happened in grade 7, but just like for context though, like I've always been extroverted and liked people and could make friends easily. So I always had large friend groups, but all through elementary and even into high school, like there were it's almost non-existent friends that would have been from that time that I'm still friends with now. And so I could navigate it. I was fine. I was, popular enough to really navigate any party or any event or anything. Like I flourished in that environment,
Mm.
but the whole time it just not like I couldn't connect where I wanted to connect. So
Mm.
I could operate at that very surfacey level and do the small talk and navigate and say the right things and portray the right image. But there was no depth. There wasn't anything that I could latch on to that I was looking for. And I'd find it in little pieces here and there, but it would be, small little isolated events or moments or things or activities. So definitely going through that. Like if you look around, like we don't see, 5 little empath boys sitting in a corner and just like hanging out, and they're going to be isolated. And if they are isolated, they don't want to draw attention themselves because then they'll be preyed upon. So there wasn't a lot of that, even though I did, have a lot of friends. There was never that deep connection where I felt safe. But what really
Mm.
happened in grade 7 is, I'm still going through all this, but I had like, there was an event where like I played chess at the time, and there was a chess tournament and chess event. And I knew that going into grade 8, I probably wasn't going to be still part of this chess club. Because again, I mean, hard enough being an empath, let alone playing chess in high school. Like, you know, all the cards stacked against me in those situations. So this was like, this is where I'm going to probably like, I'm going to do this chess. I'm probably not going to play after this. There's a big tournament that was for the island we're on, which a big, like it was a big island. And I went to this tournament, and my dad took me. And usually it wouldn't be my dad, it might be my mom, but he took me. And it was an overnight thing. We had to travel to go to it. And I didn't win the first game. And because I didn't win the first game, I got put in a different tier, which I then won. So I was a consolation winner, but I didn't win the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was this consolation winner, I had this invitation to play in the provincials, which, you know, would be the same as playing like statewide. So it was a relatively big event.
Yeah.
And at the time, my dad was like, yeah, but you couldn't even win this tournament. So the fact that you'd even want to go to this other one, it makes zero sense. And so, and it was a compelling case. So and really he just was lazy and didn't want to take me, or just wasn't supportive, or there's a million reasons.
Yeah.
But I was convinced that, you know, you're right. Like I'm not, like, there'd be no point in me going to this because I couldn't even win at this level. And so he'd convinced me that I wasn't good enough. And I felt that. And that's sort of a pivotal point, because I could have really sat with that. And I was very close to sitting with that because he had convinced me. But then I remember, I don't know, maybe like a month later or something, running into someone who did go, a person who, you know, I played chess with all the time, always beat, was much better than. He went to this tournament. I don't know, he maybe placed third or something. He did really well. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is like, and it was almost like this, I saw it.
Yeah.
And that's where this decision was made, that I was never going to and it wasn't that my dad, what he said, it was that he convinced me. That was the piece. I was like, I'm not going to let someone else convince me that I don't have that worth.
So fucking good. That's so good. That was young for you. Like, that's pretty young to have a defining moment inside of yourself like that, where you realize, wow, I let someone else's opinion of me get in my own way of my own opinion of me. I missed out on this thing. I want to say, like, that's really remarkable that it happened at such a young age for you, because I think a lot of us, it takes us a lot longer to get to that point where we're like, fuck it, I'm not letting anyone else dictate my worth. So you had that happen at a really young age. That's really special. It really is, David. I think looking at like the bigger picture, and maybe, you know, just it's my world that I'm in, but most of the people that I work with and talk with, like, it took us a lot longer in life to be able to get to that point. So that's incredible. And like, what a gift that your dad did that to you, right? I was just telling another client of mine, like, it's always a matter of perspective. Like, we can look back on that for you and be like, gosh, your dad was such a, like, why did he do that to you? Like, why did he do that? You missed out on this thing, and you could have probably won it because your friend who wasn't even as good as you got third place. You could have done it. So we could look back on that and say, like, damn, like, poor David, but look what it did for you. Holy shit. Look how that happened for you instead of to you, that you were actually, that was like the catalyst for you to be like, no more, no more. That's amazing. Really.
Yeah. Well, and even then I knew it was big even then, but it's only been the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, maybe even shorter, that I realized how big. Because looking at it too, and we don't want to get completely into the weeds with this, but this is where recently, like, I realized how, like, that epiphany isn't something that should have come in isolation. And I don't think I always assumed I had the maturity to just have that epiphany, and anyone else in the same instance would. Like, I didn't realize how rare that was. And so it's only been more recently, like within like the last even 6 months, where I realized, like, I I, in doing some of this, more spiritual work, realized that me in the current state went back in time to that younger child,
Mm.
and show, like, gave him that mentorship and guidance to be like, this is not right. So I don't think it necessarily came in isolation. I think there's
Mm.
something where, time collapsed, and I felt it in the moment, in the current moment.
Mm.
That's when I had that epiphany of like, this happened before. This is that event.
Oh, I have the chills all over my body. Yeah, time collapsed and your current self, your adult self, became that person to your younger self that needed to hear and know it was safe for him to believe in himself and to tell him that you're not going to let anyone do this to you anymore. That's amazing. And so like the whole idea of like time being, not real, which I doing the work that I do in holographic memory resolution, like I see it all the time. I deal with it all the time where people are like, time is not real. It is a construct. That's mind blowing. And I wonder for people listening, if anyone can relate to that, where there was this moment where, defying all the logic, the way it should have gone, you had that moment where you heard something bigger than you, or something came through you spiritually, or you felt some type of like very powerful energy moving through you. And we often contribute that to higher power. We contribute that to like source, or God was there, or goddess was there, or whatever, Buddha, Allah. But the cool thing is that like that was really you, because you are source. You're a slice of source, right? So now we're getting into like a lot of really cool spiritual shit and quantum physics and all this yummy stuff. But that's remarkable. And I'm like, oh my God, David, that's going to be your next book. Like you have to write that story. You have to write that story so other boys can be on the lookout for when their adult self, who's doing the self-growth and doing the spiritual journey, like, so they're listening for that. And they know, wait a minute, my future self can come and talk to me. Oh my God, like for real. Because in a lot of meditations that we do, we see our future self, our young or older, wiser self. And we have conversations sometimes with that older, wiser part of ourselves. But we don't talk to kids about that, right? Like, so kids don't have any idea that's even possible. So that's your next book idea. I will take full credit for it when it comes out.
Well, so with that, like that whole pivotal, what made it so crazy, and I didn't realize, is because of that moment, when you think of the negative self-talk, because of that moment, that's not something I've really had, is negative self-talk. And I didn't realize how rare that was, because I'm not in other people's minds. I didn't realize until more recently, or being with like different men or women, and just talking more about these things, that negative self-talk, like I'll be hard on myself, but hard on myself in the way I'll push myself, but I never feel like I'm shitty, or I'm bad, or I'm not a good person. That was eliminated in that moment, because along with, I'm never going to let anyone else make me feel less than.
Yeah.
That included myself. So I was like, I know who I am. And I think that from that point, that's where that a lot of that confidence started coming from, because I didn't have that insecurity in the sense of, am I good enough?
Yeah. And that kind of confidence that you're talking about, like that goes for men and women. Like I think the sexiest people on the planet are people who are confident, right? Like it doesn't matter what they look like. It's like when you sense someone who really knows who they are, that is sexy as hell, right? That's like, I want to be like that person. I want to be next to that person. I want to be with that person. I want to know everything I can about that person. And, for some of us, that's the work of a lifetime, is learning how to become more and more confident in who we really are. And man, it's amazing. So what would you say to, like, I don't know, like what advice would you have? So like, I'll share a little story, then you can tell me what you think. So I surprised my husband with his friends met us at a restaurant. My kids came, and my kids don't know that well my husband's few friends that came to celebrate. his birthday. So we went for this birthday dinner, and my son gets real hangry at times, and he has a lot of, sensitivities around food and when to eat and what to eat. And this was a restaurant that he'd never been to before, which we typically avoid because both my kids are highly sensitive. So we like predictability, but this was his birthday, my husband. So we went somewhere that I know he would like. And when my son saw the menu and, just being really hungry at that point, he had like a total, just, he couldn't handle it. And he was just falling apart. And I was 2 away from him. So like my daughter was next to me, and then my son was next to her. And then my husband was on the other, Jake's flank. So I couldn't get to my son, and I saw him just having this like complete meltdown. Just, I could see he was completely overwhelmed, like new restaurant. And he was so embarrassed because he wanted to cry and express his frustration that like the menu didn't look right and he didn't really feel comfortable there. But I could see the struggle in him, and he's 10. He's 10 years old. He's in 4th grade. And I just looked over at him, and it was like really heartbreaking for me to see him in that space of not feeling like he had permission to express what was needing to be expressed, that he was hungry and he was overwhelmed and he needed help with the menu. And my husband was probably talking with his friends. It would just surprised him to say hello. So he couldn't probably coach him in that moment. And I ended up switching seats with my daughter so I could get closer to my son. And I said, like, Jake, it's okay. Like, it's okay. Mom will help you figure out, like, we'll figure it out together, put my hands on him and try to help him take that breath. But he was like frozen in terror that the other guys at the table, my husband's friends, were watching him. There was so much fear in him. It was like mortification that they should see him cry. And I said, Jake, it's not a big deal. Like, it's okay, bud. Like, it's okay to like have a little outburst or to cry. And I'm like thinking, shit, like all the work I do, all the awareness I have, all the work I've done on myself, all the stuff my kids have picked up through osmosis, all the stuff my husband's picked up. Here I have this beautiful little boy who was terrified for other people to see him not strong and not having his shit together. And I was like, God, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong?
Yeah, and that's the life of a boy that's highly sensitive and an empath. Like you've explained it there in a microcosm, and he's looking at these men, and the reality is those men are going to be like, ooh, like,
yeah, they didn't say anything. They didn't say anything. They ignored it. Like they pretended like they did. Like that's what guys do, right? Like, is that what people do? Like they kind of look the other way, or they pretend it's not happening because they don't want to make the kid feel more embarrassed. But it was like, David, why didn't one of those guys look at my son and say, hey, Jake, it's okay that you're crying. Like I cry sometimes too. It's not a big deal. Why did not one of those guys say that? He was sitting across the table from them, but they all were just kind of like, didn't want to get involved. They don't want to make it worse. So they're looking at the TV up there. They're talking to Brian over here, right? Like there's this cultural we have to change the culture around not just boys, anybody feeling they need to express their emotions.
Well, and that's the thing, because when he's in that moment and he's feeling embarrassed and he's feeling self-conscious, he is weak and showing emotion and not being a man and all these things. So it's uncomfortable. And when we see it, it's uncomfortable. So our inclination is, how do we get him to learn how to block so he doesn't cry? That's our inclination. Like as parents, as society, that's the direction we've been going. And so what I'd love to see is the flip. It's not the crying that's the problem. It's the embarrassment, the insecurity, the fighting it back, just being weak, that he can't handle these emotions. That's the problem. So if we
the story he tells himself, right, David? It's the story in his head about why it's not safe to show that he's struggling.
So if and again, this is almost impossible at that age. This is like a journey, like it's a difficult journey. But if in that moment he owned the crying, like, oh my God, I'm so hungry, I'm overwhelmed, I'm breaking down in tears because like I'm overwhelmed right now. Like this is a new environment. I don't get the menu. I'm starving. Nothing on here is looking good to me. I just need some food. if he owned it in that way, everybody, even the guy, like, it doesn't matter how macho the guys, doesn't matter what's going on, you know, like if some guy's crying because their father just passed away at a funeral and they're just like, I'm sad, or, you know, I'm having these issues with this wife, and they just own it, that's not weak. But when it's like fighting back the tears and trying to push it away and just, I
Yeah.
don't feel good,
Yeah.
we don't know what to do with that person. So that's the flip. Instead of hiding it, purely owning it and just
Yeah.
being like,
Yeah.
you know, like, and you see that difference. Like even when someone's doing a speech and they're crying, but they're letting the tears come rather than fighting them back.
Yep.
That's the difference. That's what we want to
Yep.
see. And that's what we want to model, where that's okay. Because it is okay.
Yep.
But the problem is we only see the fighting back. And when we only see the fighting back, everyone recoils from that. Like if that was a man fighting back tears, like if I was at your table and I'm hungry, I'm looking at this menu, I start crying in front of you, and you're like, who is this David guy that's just like, what a wimp, like what is going on? Like just order something. But if I could own it and be like, oh my God, Stacy, like I don't even, like I can't even eat, like I've got these food allergies, or I don't know, like if, you know, like I'm overwhelmed. If I had owned it, then
Yeah.
you'd be okay. And that's the thing, is we got to own it. But to actually own it, that's the lesson. Because I'm sure even when you were thinking that, you're like, part of an inclination is, how do I help him block this, or find a safe space to cry in privacy, or even just
No,
tell him,
I
you
was,
know,
no way. I was like, I just want him to know it's okay. Like, it's okay that you're upset. It's okay. Like, you're okay. So I probably, like, instead of saying like, I might've been saying like, you're okay. Or I think like, it's okay. Like, it's okay. He probably was like, it's not okay, mom. It's not okay. And what I meant was like, it's okay to be crying. It's okay that you're flipping out right now. Like, it's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed that the guy, and I didn't say those things to him. I just kept saying like, it's okay. It's okay. Like, it's okay to be in this state. So it's like it's a lesson for me, right? Like as the mom, I have to be careful the words I'm saying. I'm thinking all these things in my head. Like, I don't think it's a big deal that you're flipping out, because this is what I do. Like, I'm learning myself how to express myself and not apologize anymore. And just, it's going to be okay to just let my emotions through. So, but it was so frustrating, because I feel like, you know, we do a lot. I have a lot of conversations. Oh my God. Do I have a lot of conversations in our home about this exact stuff, right? With my daughter and with my son. And I think my daughter's like mastered the art of owning herself. Like, it's beautiful to see. She's 12. She's going into middle school next year. And I'm like, thank you, goddess. I did my job. She's walking in that school. She is like confident in who she is and all of her uniqueness, all of her emotionality. She's a pretty emotional kid. But my boy, I realized I haven't been giving him enough of what he needs, my boy, right? And then I'm like, well, maybe it's because the kids at school are part of this fucking toxic masculine culture. And it's like counterbalancing all the stuff we're doing at home. Because at home, he's happy to express himself. We don't shame him. My husband is wonderful about accepting him in all of his emotions. So then I'm like, fuck, is it not me? Is it just because of school? Is it like school doing this to him? Like, where's it coming from? And then I'm like, shit, it's in his DNA. It's like, it's in the water. It's in the air we breathe. Of course he's going to struggle with this stuff, no matter what we do at home. So I got to work even harder at it, right? And I got to get my husband on board too, and have my husband cry every day in front of him. Say, look, I'm owning it.
well,
It's okay. Dad's cool to own his tears.
well, that's exactly, I mean, that is exactly it. And that's
Oh, so frustrating.
So I know, like, so Brene Brown, she talks all about vulnerability and stuff. And for men, the biggest shame comes from being vulnerable. That's it. And that's the heart of this problem. So for men, we can't be vulnerable. That's shame. And it's true. And that's why I was talking about, like, if he's just upset, like everyone's, you know, if I showed up at the restaurant and start crying because I can't read a menu, you know, no one's going to look at me and be like, that's sexy, you know,
right.
You know, it's because
yeah.
it's vulnerable. Yeah. But
how do we make vulnerable sexy though? Can we get there?
Yes. And that's the thing is, so that weakness. So and I use vulnerable, I should use weakness. So weakness is what the shame comes from for men. That's the
The
shame.
perception of weakness, the perception
Perception
that
of,
being vulnerable is
yes,
being weak.
exactly. So vulnerable isn't weak.
Okay,
But
thank you.
when we see,
Agree.
if we see a man crying and they're not in themselves, it is weak. And so what we need to flip this isn't sort of saying crying's fine and it's not weak, because it is, depending on the whole perception or how they are. What we need is more examples of men crying and being vulnerable, but they're strong. We don't have those examples. So that's why, like Jake or like young boys, and we see it, every weak man that's we've seen, like every crying vulnerable man we've seen, or not every, but vast majority on movies, Friends, Playground, anywhere, they're weak. We don't have
David,
too
I
many
have to stop
examples.
you. I'm having trouble with the word weak. It's like not landing right with me when you say weak, because I want to make sure that I'm understanding the word weak the way that you're meaning the word weak. And then maybe there's a different word that would be that I can accept that more, because to me, so are you saying it's the cultural norm is that crying is weak, or are you saying that you see a man in his emotions that doesn't own them as actually weak? I think
A
I'm
man who doesn't own them.
okay.
So when we see the man who doesn't own the emotions,
And when you
and they're
say weak, what do you mean by weak? Because I'm having trouble with that word. I see the word disempowered, and maybe it's the same
disempowered.
thing.
Yeah, and it's the same way when we see, like like if you feel pity or sadness, or you want to hold the guy, those are emotions that a guy doesn't want you to feel. They want you to see strength, confidence, the rock, the sexy. They own it. And so right now, when we talk about toxic masculinity, right now, the guys who are owning it are assholes.
A lot of them are assholes.
A lot of them
Yeah,
are assholes.
yeah,
It's that owning it. So
yeah.
if you try to think of examples where you've seen a guy vulnerable and crying, how many times you've seen that where they've owned it, and they've owned it in such a way that they weren't weak at all. They were strong, and you saw them and you're like, oh my God, like
Yes.
this is the person I want to see. This
Yeah.
husband who's talking to me with tears down his eyes because, we're at the altar, we're getting married, and he just owns it. And he's crying in front of this huge audience, but he's owning it. And
Yeah.
he's strong and he's powerful,
Yeah.
and you could feel that strength.
Yeah.
Those are examples we want to see.
Yeah.
But we flipped it where those are so rare that we associate tears with not owning it.
Yeah.
Because it's so rare for us to see those men owning it. And that's the flip. Once we start seeing that, like you're saying with your husband, like if he's crying and owning it and vulnerable, but he's the rock of the house, and he's, your son can look up to him and be like, that's the man of the house that I want. Like, I see
Yeah.
that confidence.
Yeah.
Then he's not going to feel that embarrassment. So with the,
Yeah.
with the menu, instead of being like, it's okay to cry, it's no, like, let's navigate through this where you own it. And you're like, Dad, this is overwhelming for me. Can you pick something for me? Because,
Yeah.
and even comment on it, or talk to the guys like, look at me, like, I'm so hungry, I'm crying, like, this is ridiculous, but
Yeah.
it's too
I
much
like
for me
that.
right now.
Yeah. Like naming it for what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
how often do we see that happen?
We don't. And the few times I feel like I do, or I see a man crying vulnerably, and I've seen my husband cry on occasions in the last 18 years, it doesn't have to happen often, but it does. It's almost like, it's like very unfamiliar. It's like almost shocking. It's like jarring. It's like, wait a minute, you're crying. It's like, I don't know how do I respond to this? Because it's so infrequent that it happens. And I try to just hold space and let him know I'm here. And it's like, being very mindful of how I'm feeling about him crying, because there is so much programming up there still, like, and I have to say, look, this is like beautiful. Like he's expressing himself, and hold the space, and like he's owning how he feels. But I have to still like coach myself in those ways. And I think it's the infrequency with which we see men cry that makes it so uncomfortable when we actually do. Like we see our kids cry all the fucking time, right? Like we know what to do in our sleep when we see a kid cry. We have our quick reactions to that. We know what to do. But like when you see a man cry, it's a very infrequent, rare occasion that we see that. So I feel like, the movement is like, men cry more, men cry more. So the women around you and the men around you can start to understand how to navigate, how to be when you cry. So it's like this, which happened first, the chicken or the egg? Like, we got to get men to cry more so that we can make it more an acceptable part of our fucking culture, that men have fucking feelings. And like you said, so many men are sensitive and very emotional, deeply emotional, but it's a part of themselves they've locked away, they've protected themselves from. And gosh, like, to me, being an empath, the joy of it is having the richness of all the emotions and the experiences. Like, just finished a book with my daughter called The Elephant Whisperer by Lawrence Anthony. Such a good book. If you're an animal empath, or you have a kid who likes animals, it's a nonfiction book. And you get so close to this elephant herd that he brings onto this reserve. And the story is just mind blowing. And I'm blubbering last night. Like, I felt myself just like, I couldn't take it, because spoiler alert, one of the elephants ends up dying. And it's heartbreaking, because this elephant whisperer, they're like family. It's like the elephants became his legit family. And I'm like all choked up. And it's so crazy, because I said to Emma, like, I'm really sorry, as I'm reading and I can't get the words out. And I heard myself say, I'm really sorry. And I was like, why am I apologizing again for this gut-wrenching emotional response to this elephant dying, after I've been taken on this gorgeous journey of emotions with this herd and the guy? And it was like, that to me, like, A, I'm still apologizing. Oh my God, I still have work to do. And B, that's the joy to me of being an empath. I get to experience, holy shit, the depth. And I even had like a dream last night, like a terrible dream that was from the book. And my daughter had a similar terrible dream, because we were so connected to the emotions of this book and the elephant that kind of like turned on him. I mean, talk about a rich emotional life. It's so sad that the male empaths especially, they have this gift available to them, this richness of experiencing the world and love and life and nature and animals and everything. They can be so passionate in this world, but because of all these norms, and I guess the ignorance and the fear, they have to shut it down, and they can't own it, because
Yeah.
it's not acceptable. It's not safe.
That's where like, when we need to see more men crying, we do.
Yes.
But I'd add that not only do we have to see more men crying, we have to see more men crying that own it.
That own it.
So if you think of, and I guess a good image, and this just came to me, like, if I'm crying in front of you and my shoulders are rolled forward and I'm blubbering and just overwhelmed, you're going to look at me and feel differently at that image than if I'm crying, my shoulders are back, tears are coming down, and I'm telling you about my emotion and how I'm like what I'm feeling. But I'm standing upright, my shoulders are back.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, I think, like you're talking about, like sexy, confident, strong. I'm showing the same vulnerability in each instance, but we need to roll our shoulders back.
Yeah.
So when I'm crying, and that's going to be in the face of like women, but also men. Like if I'm standing tall, and I'm talking to you, or if I'm in front of an audience, at a wake, at my, father's wake, and I'm standing tall, tears are coming down, but I'm talking about my dad. Yeah. No one's going to look and say, there's a weak guy standing in front of me. There's someone who I like, that is vulnerable in a bad way. That's what we need examples of. Whereas the same thing, the person who's like, I can't go on, they're curled up in a ball, they get ushered off the side of the stage because they're just overwhelmed. That's the type of crying we don't want to see, because men want to be seen as strong. Yeah. They don't want to be seen as weak. So maybe weak's the wrong answer or the wrong word, but weak to men is like their kryptonite. They never want to be seen as weak. And so to disassociate crying and vulnerability with weak, we need to roll those shoulders back and cry.
I want to see like your 12-step process for like, how do you own your cry? Like, okay, first you put your shoulders back, and then you take a deep breath, and then you say to yourself, it's safe to feel, it's sexy to feel my emotions. Like, I would love for you to have like a framework that, because it's like one thing to say, like, own your crying, be confident in your emotions, but it's like, how do you do that if you've never seen another man do that? Like, how do you actually do it? So like, maybe that can be like the next thing that, we talk about on the next episode is like, here is David Delisle's like framework for men, young, old, and boys and teens. This is how to own your feelings. This is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. These are the thoughts I say to myself. So like, I wish you could somehow deconstruct the process so that we can teach it to our boys. Cause I'm a woman. Like,
well,
how do
even
I
just
teach it to Jake?
tell them to roll his shoulders back, stand tall, and cry. And it's not just for boys, it's for women as well. So when you think of like, I think it's Oprah who always talks about the ugly cry.
Yeah.
Like the ugly cry is.
I hate my ugly cry. It is so ugly. Like I'll do anything not to ugly cry.
But I could be wrong on this, but my feeling is the ugly cry is when you're fighting it. Like for men
or you just have a really ugly face when you're in your cry, in my case.
But if you're owning it and tears are coming down and you're crying, but you're not fighting back the tears, I think the fighting back the tears is what all of a sudden shifts
makes it ugly. Yeah.
So when you think about the 12-step process, here's someone fighting back their tears, and here's the same person not fighting back the tears.
Yeah.
And when you see that difference, that contrast, it's so obvious. You're like, well, that person not fighting back their tears, that's someone who like
they're in their power. That's again,
power.
like it's like power versus disempowerment. Like that's kind of the words that I would use. Like that's a person in their power. Like that's a person.
And those are
fully embodied person.
Yeah, and those are probably more accurate words. But for it to land with a guy, as soon as you say weakness, like that's the last thing guys want to be perceived as.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I'm thinking like a woman, not a man. Yeah. So we're wrapping up on an hour already. I feel like we just started. It's so crazy. Like, how could that have been an hour? David, I want you to come back. I want to share you again with listeners because you have not just become a beautiful example of a male empath in his power or empowering himself, because like it's never over. It's always a continual process. But also you're a male empath who has found on your spiritual journey, you found like a higher calling and a purpose. And can you tease your book a little bit for us, and then we'll have you back and you can talk more about it? Or does that feel like you want to wait till the next time that we're together to talk about that?
Yeah, no, I could tease it a bit. I mean, it's a children's book. It's a graphic novel, and it teaches kids about money. And that in itself is beautiful because we don't teach kids about money, and we don't teach it. And if we try, it's not in a fun way. And this is just an adventure. So an adventure, illustrated adventure, kids can flip it real quick. It is, it's 100 pages, but it's fully illustrated. So you can go on this adventure and learn about money. But back to like this sort of empath idea, or what's important, or just the whole book, even though it's about money, is more about what's really important to you and that awareness. Because that's what I find is when we think about money, the first thing we always think about is how to have more of it. And this book does teach the habits to have more of it. But more important than how to have more is why you would want more in the first place. And if you don't learn that lesson, then it doesn't matter if you have $1 million, 10 million, 100 million. Like we see it with our billionaires. There's a constant leveling up and searching for more, because that's all we've been taught. So I try to just open that awareness to what's important. And once you know what's important, now we'll take you on an easy journey of, how to create wealth. But really it comes down to, what do you want? And it's not about more.
Oh, so cool. So inspiring. I'm going to pre-order my copy today on your website.
So the website's theawesomestuff.com.
Theawesomestuff.com.
And the reason it's the awesome stuff is that's the first lesson of getting to know what's really important to you. What's your awesome stuff?
And I don't know, forgive me, but I see a parallel between all that we just talked about and this idea of wealth too. It's like wealth, financial wealth, but it's also like the wealth of being fully alive right? It's like that abundance of like being strong and being empowered and being embodied. So I don't know if you've thought of that before, but it kind of seems really relevant for your story and what you shared today, and following what lights you up, your awesome stuff. I love that. Love that. So that's what will make you rich, right? In all the ways that you can be rich. It's following what you love. So theawesomestuff.com. David's book is coming out soon, right? Next month?
Yeah,
This month?
yeah. The end of June is the official book launch. The
Cool.
book's just arrived with the distributor, so it's finally available. And yeah, it's been
And
a
what
process.
ages is it for? Who would you recommend it for
So
age-wise?
that's what's so beautiful about this is I wrote it so even a 5-year-old could get it.
Mm.
Like the concepts are that simple. Target age would be like those early elementary grades, 7 to 10 age-wise, but like early elementary. But it's
Awesome.
actually written for adults. So the messages are written in a way that a 5-year-old will get them, but they're universal messages. So anyone who doesn't like learning about finance, or when people start talking about money, they're like, nah, this book is for them. Like what I want is the parents to get this book and then read it as a family. And I hope this will become, a high school
Mm.
graduation gift, because all the lessons in there, they're fundamental lessons. Like we overcomplicate this whole thing, and it doesn't have to be. It's habits and mindset. It's not, we shouldn't be trying to teach people math and high finance. It's just simple habits
Mm.
and your mindset around it. And that's what this book does. And even for the high school grad or an adult going through it, it's as easy as that. And that will shift everything on the way you view money, how you save, how you perceive money, and what's important to you.
Amazing. Oh my God, we all need that so badly. We need it so badly. My son is also obsessed with money. He loves money. He loves talking about money. He loves saving money. He wants to be a millionaire one day. So I'm definitely getting the book for Jake and me, and we'll read it as a family. And I imagine there's a lot of people listening who also would love to have something like that as a resource for the whole family, because that is another great conversation starter. Like money, how do you feel about money? What are your stories around money? So gosh, congrats to you for tackling a topic that can be really taboo and really difficult and simplifying it for us all, because damn, we need that more than ever. David, thank you. I absolutely loved this conversation, and I am looking forward to us being together again. And I will poll my audience to see what else they want to know from fellow empath in his power, David Delisle. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, definitely I'd love to come back and answer those questions. And there are so many similarities between men and women, but then at the same time there's a few fundamental differences. So yeah, ask away on those questions. And I want to thank you again, Stacey, as well, because being part of that workshop definitely shifted how I viewed it and allowed me to start reframing and just building on those things that were always there, but before you name it or recognize it or see it, it's sometimes you're just floundering around, and you help focus.
I'm so glad.
Awareness.
I'm so happy that was important for you. It's funny, Leanne just came on and did an episode too, and we talked about her empath epiphany about naming it. So same thing, like it is important to name it. So I'm glad that was helpful for you. Yeah. And I look forward to following you and staying in touch and like just seeing what's next for you, because you've got so much, I know, just that's going to birth from you and all that you're going through. So, all right, friend, have a beautiful day. Thanks for coming on, and we will see you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much. It was fun.